So what we're going to do today is we're going to have a discussion about the Chapter 11 discussion forum, specifically focusing on identity development with adolescents. So, the whole chapter of the whole chapter 11 focuses on developmental psychology, which is a widespread field within the umbrella of psychology as a whole. So it covers a bunch of different topics, covers things on the biological end, psychological end, cognitive end, sociological end, pretty much every facet of development across the lifespan. So that's why it's called developmental psychology or lifespan development, because it's covering change all across the lifespan for every period of life, not just adolescence. But for the purposes of our discussion forum, we're focusing on adolescence. All right. So there's controversy amongst different researchers about when adolescence actually begins. So some will take more of a biological approach and they will say, okay, adolescence begins, you know, once you hit puberty. And puberty can start for some people as early as about 8 or 9 years old. For some people, it can start as late as like 15, 16 years old. So puberty is a period in adolescent development where your body starts to change essentially. So you start to develop in your primary and secondary sex organs, and by the end of this, for women, you gain the ability to produce children. Men, pretty much the same thing. So it is the onset of puberty is marked by the first menstrual cycle for a female and the first ejaculation for a male. So that is like the onset of it. But then it kind of continues to go. You go through a growth spurt. You go through growth spurts in your body as well as your brain. So your body, your brain, literally every facet of you is growing all at the same time. So some people take more of the biological approach and they say puberty can or adolescence can start as early as when puberty starts. But others will take a different approach and they'll say, well, maybe we should go more on the cognitive end. And we could say that, by the time you hit about 13, your brain is going through a growth spurt. So therefore, maybe we can say that that's when adolescence begins. So maybe adolescence should just be considered to be the teen years, so 13 to like 19 or so. Then others will take even another approach and they'll say, well, maybe it's not about, you know, on the cognitive side, maybe it's not on the puberty side, maybe it's just, the period of time between childhood and adulthood. When does childhood end? We can say maybe around 12 or 13 years old, but then when does childhood end? That's another controversy. So does childhood really end as soon as you turn 18? Does it end more so when you turn 21? Does it end sometime after that? So for some researchers, there's like a struggle about when it should begin and when it should end. So the range for adolescence can start as early as like 8 or 9, depending on who you're asking, and it can end like as late as like 23, depending on who you're asking. But nevertheless, adolescence in and of itself is a period of life where you are going through tremendous change in every area. In fact, this period of life is kind of it kind of has as much change associated with it as the first year of life. So the first year of life, you grow in every area as well. So you're going through growth spurts, you're going through language spurts, you're growing through um, growth in the cognitive area, social area. You're growing in every single area in that first year of life. Pretty much the same thing is happening during adolescence, except it's just for a longer period of time. So instead of just all of it being kind of condensed into 1 year, it's kind of happening for a 4 or 5 year span. So, adolescence is one of those things where you're going through a lot of growth and change in multiple areas. So, while you're going through all these different changes, one of the many changes that adolescents go through, which is kind of similar once again to what happens during that first year of life, is you are struggling for some sense of autonomy. Except in the first year of life, once you go from like an infant to being like a toddler, your sense of autonomy as a toddler is more so like, I want to walk on my own now. I don't want anybody picking me up. I want to, feed myself now. I don't want anybody feeding me. I want to pick out my own colors of my clothes and things like that. I don't want anybody picking out my clothes. I want to put it on myself. I want to do all these things myself. So your autonomy as like a 2-year old is going to be different than your autonomy as a 13 or 14-year-old, but you still are struggling for autonomy. And autonomy in and of itself is just you being able to make your own decisions, you being able to make your own choices about what you want to do with certain things. So as a toddler, it's like I want to hold my own spoon or hold my own fork. As an adolescent, it might be like I want to drive my own car, or I want to go to this party and I want to stay out until this time, or I want to go with my friends to this place and I don't want my parents to be the ones to bring me. So, or, the list goes on and on. I want to work at this job and I want to make my own money. So adolescence, your sense of autonomy is going to be different. It's going to be closer to what you would feel like as an adult versus the autonomy that we struggle for as a child. So, one of the researchers who focused on adolescent struggle for autonomy was Erik Erikson. And he actually was a stage theorist, and he had 8 different stages that he covered that went from birth all the way to the end of a person's life. And during the adolescent stage, he said what you're going through is something called the identity versus role confusion stage. So in this stage, the adolescent is trying to find their self in a number of different ways. So the adolescent suffers from a number of different identity crises during this time, depending on what is most important to them. So one of the biggest ones is, what do I want to do with my life? Because typically during adolescence, at least in the United States, what is happening is you are in high school, but the high school is only 4 years. So by the time you get to your senior year or even your junior year, there's pressure for college, there's pressure for careers, there's pressure for you to make decisions about your life that are going to impact the rest of your life. And because of that, many adolescents might start to really ask those questions like, who am I? What do I stand for? Et cetera, et cetera. So what do you want to do for your future is one of those things that helps to contribute to your sense of identity. Also, nowadays we're dealing with political things, and that's been going on for decades. But in more recent times, we're dealing with political struggles, like what do I stand for politically? Religious, like which religion do you feel like you want to adhere to? Sexual identity, gender identity. So there's so many different identities. Vocational identity. What kind of people do I want to hang out with as a friend? So adolescents are struggling to try to find out who they are, and they're trying to ask these questions in many different areas of their life all at the same time. And some will place more emphasis on certain areas than others, but every adolescent is pretty much trying to ask themselves those kind of questions, essentially. So Erik Erikson believed that if the adolescent successfully explores different identities and chooses one, then they will have attained what their sense of identity. And if they either don't explore or don't feel like they know who they are by the time they get through the end of this stage, then what will end up happening is the adolescent might feel a sense of confusion. So what contributes to the adolescent either attaining identity or feeling confused? He believed that one of the primary things that helps play a role in this area is the relationship with parents. So and this might seem like kind of counterintuitive, because once you become a teen, you start to struggle for that sense of independence. You start to struggle for that sense of autonomy. But at the same time, depending on how the parents or caregivers are relating to the adolescent, that can play a very strong role in how successfully the adolescent actually achieves their sense of identity. So if the parents or caregivers are supportive, nurturing, helping them to navigate through the process, then they will feel like, okay, they'll feel more grounded to explore different identities, and then they'll also feel more grounded to choose an identity. But on the flip side, if there's storm and stress and fights and sagas and drama, then it might be a bit more of a struggle to navigate trying to figure out who you are, essentially, because you don't want to. A lot of adolescents, you still want the approval of the parent. Even though you want to do your own thing, you still don't want to feel like you're at war at the same time. So it could be a really a delicate topic. The one good thing about it, though, is that for most adolescents, most adolescents feel like they have a strong relationship with their parents. And also, if you already had a strong relationship with your parents before adolescence hit, you're most likely going to have that relationship is probably going to continue once you become in this phase when you're trying to find your identity. It's usually only the kids who are already having issues with their parents or caregivers that end up having more difficulties during this time as well. Another thing that happens during this time is that although parents are important in trying to determine identity questions or the answers to identity questions, peers actually take more of a front seat, so to speak. So parents are still echoes in the back of your mind. They still play a strong role, but peers kind of take the driver's seat in terms of helping the adolescent to determine what they want to do. And it's one of the reasons for that is because an adolescent will feel like they relate more to their peers than they do their parents. And they will feel like their peers understand them more than their parents do, 9 times out of 10, because your peers are going through the same thing. So if they're trying to find their identity, you're trying to find your identity. They're having struggles, you're having struggles. They have questions, you have questions. You feel more like you relate to that person than you do with your parent. Your parent might present themselves as somebody who seems like they have all the answers, but you may, as an adolescent, might feel like you don't understand me, basically. So what ends up happening is peers have a tendency to take a stronger influence in either helping or hindering adolescents to um in their quest for identity. So James Marcia is another researcher who focused on identity in adolescence, and what he described was that there were 4 different categories that an adolescent might fall into when they're trying to answer the question of who they are, what they stand for, what they represent, etc., etc. So he believed that there's 4 different identity statuses, and each one of these statuses are determined by whether or not the adolescent is exploring different identities, and also whether or not the adolescent feels like they've actually committed to a specific identity. So if you are in the status of identity foreclosure, Marcia would say that you have not explored any identities, but you've still chosen one. And usually what happens in that case is the adolescent has let somebody else make the decision for them, basically. So if your parents or your peers or whoever says, hey, this is what you are, and then you just don't even really question it, you just kind of go with it, and you just feel like that's what I am because that's what everybody said, then that would be identity foreclosure. You have not really explored any identities, you kind of just chose the one that everybody else said. Then we have identity diffusion, and that is where there's also no exploration going on, and there's no commitment either. So what happens is the adolescent is not exploring identities, and then they also have not chosen identity. So usually people who fall into this category are ones who would be more confused. So if you ask the adolescent a question like, what do you want to be when you grow up? I don't know. What do you feel like your thoughts are on this? I don't know. Where do you want to go in this direction? I don't know. So like the person in this situation is more confused or apathetic, or they just feel like they don't know. They feel like they lack a sense of direction. Then we have what's known as the identity moratorium, and that is where adolescents are highly exploring different identities, but they have not chosen one. So they're like just trying to figure things out. So this might be the adolescent that you see that, this week they're doing this, the next week they're doing the opposite. Then the week after that, they might be doing something else completely different from the first 2 weeks. And what is going on here is they are trying to find their self. So they're trying to do different things, going through different phases, etc., etc. And eventually they usually will settle on one. But right now they're just kind of having fun exploring different identities. And then last but not least, we have what's known as identity achievement. And identity achievement is when the adolescent has gone through an exploration phase, and they've also feel like they could have committed to a specific identity as well. So if an adolescent feels like they've explored and achieved an identity or committed to an identity, then this is seen as the most healthy version of identity status, because the adolescent has seemingly explored all options and chosen one for themselves. So those are the different statuses that James Marcia believed that you go through. One thing I do want to note though is that when adolescents are on a quest for identity, we often will typically think that identity is something that, because it happens so heavily in adolescence, we'll feel like once you have chosen your identity, you're set in stone. But that's actually not the case. So the quest for identity actually starts as early as infancy. The most major one happens during adolescence, but even after adolescence, throughout the rest of our life, we do go through cycles where we start to like find ourselves in different ways. So we might go through another identity crisis by the time we hit 30, another one when we hit 40, another one when we hit 60. And usually whenever there's like a significant life change that occurs for us, there usually is a shift in our sense of identity and who we are as well. So the quest for identity never really ends. It's just something that continues to reevaluate itself over the course of our life. All right. So Another thing that happens as the adolescent is on their quest for trying to find themselves is they will have a tendency to form friendships with people who they feel are like-minded with them. So they can be part of a friendship circle where there's like two or three people that they're close to. They can be part of a clique, or they could be part of a crowd, or they could be part of an overall group of adolescents who kind of seem to share common interests. Like for instance, if there's somebody who's like really into community work, they might join like an honor society, or they might join it's called the Key Club, or they might join like some kind of community organization like Boys and Girls Club or something like that, where they feel like they want to do more like community type efforts. If they're more of an athlete, they might join a team, and then be part of that, and have friends over in that area. So adolescents will have a tendency to start to gravitate toward groups of people who they feel like are relating to them in their quest for identity. So that's usually what will end up happening in those groups that they do form. Those groups can either pose as a help or a hindrance in the adolescence, because sometimes if we're hanging around the right type of crowd, that crowd can help uplift us and help us to find our identity even more. But on the flip side, if they're just as confused as we are, then that we might end up going down the wrong path when it comes to trying to find our identity. All right, so that was a brief discussion of identity, the quest for identity, etc., etc. So now going to the forum. Um, so using the concepts that you learn in this chapter, explore the concept of identity. Erik Erikson and other theorists posit that during adolescence, people go through identity crises or exploration. What was your process like, and how does it relate to what the textbook says about the topic? If you don't feel comfortable discussing yourself, feel free to stick to what the textbook says about forming an identity and reflect on that in your post. The reason why I put this in here like this is because some of us do have those experiences where it was not necessarily a happy time for us when we were on our quest for identity as adolescents. So I just wanted to remain sensitive of that for people who may not have had the best experience when they were trying to like find their quest for identity. By all means, if you feel comfortable sharing your quest for identity, feel free to share it, but don't feel like you are, forced to say anything that you don't necessarily want to share. So if you want to share your experience, go ahead and share it. If you don't want to share your experience, you don't have to share your experience. You could just stick with what the textbook says, stick with what the research says. But it's all about identity. So what is happening during this process? What does the textbook say about it? What does the research say about it? What was your experience if you want to share? And then comment on two classmates. So hopefully this helped. And I look forward to reading your discussion posts, and we'll talk again next time with another chapter.